Yo, what is up? We are back for another awesome video. I'm ready. Hopefully the audio works. We're gonna... Yeah, so we're watching The Corporate State, The History of Corporatism Part 2 that I'm gonna react to, and I'm excited. I'm gonna try and let the video play out more though, because I really want to pay attention to this. Yeah, I guess we could just start. Let's go.
In the last part, which more or less served as an introduction to the series, I tried my best to give a concrete definition of the corporate system, while taking into account the numerous
Yeah, the video kind of underperformed. Come on, guys, we need to do better on this. The Lavader videos, they don't do as well, which is like really weird, man. People want to react to Epic History TV instead.
variations of corporatism that do exist. In the video, I also went through a short summary of corporatism throughout history and how it evolved. But, as I said, it was extremely brief, and I believe that in order to understand corporatism in its entirety, one also has to understand its origins and how it came to be in the first place. For a good while, and I believe this is also the case for many of you, I believe that corporatism came to be from Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum from 1891. But as I researched more about corporatism, I found out that Rerum Novarum didn't invent corporatism. Rather, it redefined it as a full-fledged ideology in the late 19th century. The idea of a corporate, organic, integralist, and functionally organized society has been around for a very long time. In Western tradition, it goes back to ancient Greece, Rome, and the Bible, the very founding and main pillars of Western civilization.
The Bible talks about corporatism. That's really interesting since I'm a Christian. Yeah. Okay, this is really drawing me in. I'm really curious.
And this is what I want to explore in today's video, taking a closer look at the old corporatist concepts in history and how they evolved and reformed, like for example taking a look at the medieval period, because corporatism was present in the structure of the medieval estates and society. I should emphasize that I will be analyzing specifically the Western conception of corporatism. While I did mention that corporatism can be found in Asia and Africa, I do this for two reasons. Number one, it is the tradition most of my viewers are familiar with and know best, and number two, it is out of the Western tradition that a complete corporatist ideology manifested. We should still keep in mind that this is just one corporatist conception among several, but it is one that I argue is the most important one. So let us start questioning what the origins of
I understand that.
corporatism really are.
Okay, so we got the pillars of civilization. It goes back to what you said, like Greece and Rome, which really does interest me. I mean, I guess I can understand that because on one hand, like, there was the emperor mixed with the republic, and they tried to work with a bunch of, like, you know, the groups and organizations and stuff. I wouldn't really say that they were like corporations per se. It was more like trade merchants back in the day.
As previously mentioned, the origins of the corporatist theory and socio-political organization in the Western tradition may be found in the very origins of Western civilization itself, the Bible, Greek philosophy, and Rome. Let us start off with the Bible. The biblical conception of corporatism comes mainly from Paul the Apostle in his letter to the Christians at Corinth found in the New Testament. Paul suggests an organic conception of society and politics, with all its functional units integrated, harmonized, and performing their proper function. Quote, "Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all
I don't think it's pronounced gentiles. You could just say Gentiles.
given the one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but of many. Now, if the foot should say, 'Because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body,' it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, 'Because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body,' it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as He wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the head cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable we treat with special honor, and the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. Now you are the body of Christ, and each one of you is a part of it. And God has placed in the church first of all apostles, second prophets, third teachers, then miracles, then gifts of healing, of helping, of guidance, and of different kinds of tongues. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all have gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Now eagerly desire the greater gifts. Thus, just as in the human body, the arms, legs, heart, and mind must all be interrelated and function like a well-oiled machine, so in society and politics, all the participants must be similarly integrated. Religion and governance, economics and politics.
Alright, I think I get what he's saying. It's gonna be hard to interpret them, but I guess towards my understanding of his point is just how God is saying how we all are connected as one body, and we all kind of have very important roles towards each other. He says that system can work at a state like presence, which, I mean, I don't know if God directly meant, like other things like businesses or, government, because usually the government can do a lot of corrupt things. However though, I think I get what he's saying though. Like, I think I can understand it. Just, I don't think the Bible directly was talking about like government officials, because the problem is, God and Jesus, that's all kind of revolving around the Bible. He's saying like we all have a role within the Bible, within the church, right? And Western civilization kind of adapted based off the Bibles, and how the Bible saw it was also, there was a lot of quotes about, how we should have that type of freedom too, right? We have that ability to make our own choices in life, right? And that's why you don't see church really forcing it upon people to convert in America. You might saw in like Spain, which Spain did it wrong. It was supposed to be more of a willing choice, just like how America handled it. Moving on though, I think I can kind of understand where he's coming from. I just don't know. I just don't think it's exactly what you can connect every single way. We all have a role to play, and I think that can work well with, like, in some sense, towards business and all the other kinds of groups, labor unions, all of that. But at the same time though, a lot of them, it's not like they're religious. It's not like they care about God's teachings and stuff, right?
Lords and peasants, capital and labor. Ancient Greece, particularly Aristotle in his work The Politics, made a significant early and deep impact on the concept of corporatism. Aristotle held the view that politics and society are inherent advantages and have persisted through time, rather than being malevolent or contrived. Given this belief in the inherent positivity of political practice and governance, he saw no necessity for the implementation of restricted governance or safeguards such as those found in the US Constitution. Aristotle believed that society should be organized along quote-unquote natural class and functional lines, like warriors, the priesthood, slaves, and rulers. Quote, and clearly, property should be in their hands, since the husbandmen will of necessity be slaves or barbarian perioeci. Of the classes enumerated, there remain only the priests, and the manner in which their office is to be regulated is obvious. No husbandman or mechanic should be appointed to it, for the gods should receive honor from the citizens only. Now, since the body of the citizen is divided into two classes, the warriors and the counselors, and it is beseeming that the worship of the gods should be duly performed, and also a rest provided in their service for those who from age have given up active life, to the old men of these two classes should be assigned the duties of the priesthood. Of course, today we no longer accept Aristotle's notion of a natural slave or ruling class, but his notions that a society should be organized along functional or occupational lines, on an ordered and bureaucratic basis, that each unit of society should perform its proper functions, and that all the parts need to be harmonized into an organic whole, would prove to be very attractive to future corporatist writers as well as political leaders. Lastly, we turn to the third influential source, Rome. Roman political thinkers expanded upon Greek ideas, such as the organic theory of state and society, while also introducing their unique concepts. Unlike the Greeks, who maintained direct citizen involvement in their compact city-states, the vast Roman Empire implemented a system of indirect representation organized by groups. This system closely mirrors, if not replicates, the example I demonstrated in the previous video, allocating a certain number of seats to the military, religious representatives, and so forth. Rome had a much more elaborate and organized system of corporate and societal associations, with a variety of military, professional, and religious institutions.
Yes, but how exactly did Rome fall? A lot of it was due to corruption within the government, and it wasn't like everything was like, you know, I get your point on totalitarian states form when government or systems fail, but why does it fail? How did Rome, coming from such a well-made system and politically so powerful, how come they kind of just became really, really bad at their job? It's because over time, what happened was the government was becoming more and more corrupt, and they were getting away with a lot more things, and they thought, they kind of pushed the limits on their power. You saw that with what happened with Caesar, right? Where Caesar, he was changing everything, and he was like dominating the whole scene and becoming so powerful and very popular that he had to be murdered by the other dudes, right? I believe 13 of them came into the room to kill him, and what happened was people were so angry they kind of got themselves to collapse, and then we soon had Augustus take over in Rome, and then that created a new Roman Empire. The Roman Republic failed due to a lot of government jealousy, corruption, fear over the power of Caesar, and also its failing state. Why did people find Caesar more popular? Because they didn't do anything. They were useless. Meanwhile, Caesar was conquering everything, and he was doing this on his own. He was like not really having as much with government help, and he was kind of strong on his own, right? And people like that and preferred him as a better leader, better person than how the republic was going. And the empire failed due to just a lot of government corruption, paying people and generals to have their own like thing, and they were kind of splitting apart from each other, and they just didn't really want to be together as a team. And that's what I think it all goes down to. Humans are inherently corrupt. Humans are inherently gonna do wrong. I think personally that I would rather want a world where government doesn't have as much power, because the government has way more responsibility, can cause a lot more damage than what humans can do. Right? I understand the concept of how humans can be really, really horrible. However, I don't think corporatism is something that we can just throw off the table. I think the best way for it to work is if there's like a guarantee in some way that, the government can't just like, become really corrupt, stuff like ending lobbying or, have better accountability when the government does, it does a lot of corrupt things. I think, things like stopping government from bailing out banks that, don't do anything, or just letting business go through. I think that type of stuff is what needs to be done. Why do you think we had that 2008 crash, right? Like, it's because at first it was doing bad, right? Everyone kind of just took out the money at the last second. The banks kind of just... But then, as they were starting to improve, the government's like, oh, let's bail you out, which made it worse. If the government didn't, intervene, it would have been fine. I think there's a bunch of problems. The government can maybe be a good mediator sometimes. I think, however, that we shouldn't over-rely on the government, and we shouldn't be so, all the time reliant. It needs to be a mutual respect.
Which were often called collegios. Each had their own charter. These groups were usually monopolistic in character, but the state exercised control over and governed the relations between them. In the biblical, Greek, and Roman conceptions, therefore, we can already find the most of the ingredients of 20th century corporatism. After the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century and its subsequent overtaking by so-called barbarians, there was a regression in social and economic structures to a simpler state. The central political power dissolved, leading to the emergence of smaller local entities. This era is commonly referred to as the Dark Ages. Historians often divide the Middle Ages into two subcategories: the Dark Middle Ages, from the fall of Rome through the 10th century, and the High Middle Ages, from the 11th century through the 15th. It is the High Middle Ages I will be mainly focused on.
To my sources, I think they documented 3 eras. There was like one where it was the post-Rome era, right, dealing with the collapse of the Roman Empire. There was a second era, like a classical period where things started to get better, and then finally ended, with the, I think, 15th to 16th century, with like the High Medieval era, where it was kind of just the slow downfall collapse and into a new state, a new world. And that was the Renaissance, which Renaissance means rebirth of the earth, I think.
Here.
Or rebirth of the world.
Even during the earlier period, we can see some ingredients that will go into the later corporatist philosophy. The idea that property has a social function and was to be used for the good of all. The nascent theory of a just price and fair wage, the principle of an uneven hierarchy of laws and persons, and so forth. In Western Europe, this corporatist conception now gained a Christian form from the dominant religious beliefs at the time. This is why, for example, the relations of seller and buyer, employer and employee, were supposed to be governed not by conflict and the impersonal market, but by Christian notions of brotherhood and just price. Now, during the Middle Ages, large social and political organizations began to reappear, as well as new interpretations on previous systems. For example, the new religious reorganization spearheaded by the Roman Catholic Church, the appearance of universities, but it is the appearance of artisan and craft guilds that is really intriguing, with their hierarchical systems of apprentices, journeymen, and master craftsmen. The guilds licensed and policed their own members, helped regulate trade and prices, and were essentially self-governing professional associations that helped provide both for progress and social peace. It is to the guild system that later corporatist writers often looked for a model of efficient economic management and class collaboration. Today, as you journey across Europe, remnants of the medieval corporatist system and guilds are still visible. You'll notice streets dedicated to special crafts, like silver artisans, goldsmiths, and various professional or functional groups.
Yeah, but personally, not personally, this is something that I think we need to be practical about. I don't think corporatism in the medieval era was really the best time. The thing is, anytime that government has connection with all these groups, right, like state within church, church within the state, or business within the state, you know, that's technically corporatism. Corporatism can be very, very vague, I believe. I think that's something I feel like you need to elaborate more on. And the medieval type of corporatism wasn't really the best system. They were dealing with major collapse and kind of dealing with a really horrible era. They had to deal with like, you know, all their enemies all around them. They had to deal with like, I guess like one is the Russia. Russia was starting to rise, but they had to fight so much. They kept on going in wars. It was really bloody and really horrible to live in, especially how cold it was. If you were in France, you had to deal with England. England had to deal with France. They were fighting each other. There was the whole 100 Years' War. Then the Holy Roman Empire was going through a golden era until it started, you know, breaking down within, I think, the 12th or 13th century. And then you had to deal with like how the rise of the Muslims, sorry, not Muslims, I forgot their name, but they were in Turkey, right? The modern day Turkey and Asia Minor, and they conquered a bunch of territories, and they were going after the Byzantine Empire, which started the whole Crusades, and they even went all the way up to Spain. I don't believe the Muslims came in yet, but I think they were ethnically Arabic. I'm not too sure, but I do know they rose to power and they were very strong, but it kind of created a big problem towards Europe, like, you know, losing Spain would, and even almost losing France, which would have been insane.
Each group is distinguished by its unique flag and uniform, regulates its own membership, and occupies a distinct position in the social hierarchy. This medieval corporate group system ran parallel to, overlapped with, and often encompassed the system of medieval estates, with which we are more familiar with. The estate system consisted of the primary estate,
I don't think this is a good system. I mean, like, what's so great about it? You have a bunch of people who were, you know, having a horrible time and living. Then you had these groups that were just so much, you know, so overpowered, and they were oppressing them, you know what I mean? It wasn't a good era. It wasn't a good time. It wasn't like they all worked together. It was because, you know, government corruption, and the government had so much power. You know, I think we can all recognize that when a government has so much power, there's nothing you can really do about it until, you know, the people realize they are 98% of the population. They need to start rising up. I think it makes, you know, but the problem is once the people get into power, right, and it's just like without any kind of group or organization, it can lead to a lot of chaos because someone else can take over and fill that power vacuum, you know, that massive power vacuum, and then just try and become dictator. Like, you know, what happened with Joaquin, I think, right? Chopped all the heads down until his head was chopped down, and he said he was like a god. I think like Robespierre, I think.
nobles, the second estate, the clergy, and finally the third estate, the common people. This also was a system based on hierarchy, rank, and special privileges. But in many countries, the structure of society was more complicated, as can be seen in this graph. It had 3 estates, organized in terms of hierarchical class layers, plus such corporate groups organized along vertical lines as the military orders, towns, and so on. The clergy was both an estate and a functional organization. Medieval society was often thus cross-cut by both class and functional or corporatist divisions. But eventually, as I described in the last part, it would come to a conflict between the corporate groups and the central government. And this was especially the case because of the centralizing tendencies of several emerging monarchies. So in Europe, the earliest notions of limited government and checks and balances revolved around these notions of corporate group rights serving as a countervailing power to royal absolutism. The French Revolution of 1789 was one of the turning points in history. Not only did it overthrow the French monarchy and instill the values of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but also it swept away the guilds and corporative privileges.
I don't think that was the biggest start of it. Personally, I think like America was the foundation of liberty. The French Revolution was the bad side of it. That's when it goes wrong. America was the start of it. Fighting a very oppressive government that did a lot of horrible things. The British government was like not really the best government, and the Americans didn't like it, yet they weren't really given a say. But guess what? We fought hard for our independence. Well, I didn't do it, but they did, and that was really brave of them. They did an amazing job, and they kind of created the power of America, which I think that's the thing we have to all recognize. Corporatism doesn't nearly make as much power as what like an American, something like America's system is. Capitalistic and much more towards freedom. Why do you think every single all of them went to it? The Irish, right? They were having the famine. England didn't care. Britain didn't care, so they went to America, right? The Polish, the Jews, right? The Jews being impressed by the Russians, and they all left towards America, right? And then especially the anti-Semitism, in all these European countries, they left to America. Then you also had what was it, ethnic Germans, right? They left towards America. A bunch of ethnic peoples, right? And they all moved in and lived in America, and because America was so great to live in, I think something like that's hard to really recreate because America's situation, right? But I'm just saying this is something when it goes wrong. The French did it completely wrong. They messed up. It was a horrible idea, right? They broke away, which, it led to Napoleon taking power, a dictator basically. But was Napoleon bad? I wouldn't 100% say so. I think he had a lot of wars, which, they weren't 100% what he wanted, but he definitely did participate in the wars. He definitely probably encouraged war, but I don't think he 100% wanted all these wars. I think he's probably wanted to be left alone, but if he was going to fight a war, he was going to fight a war. The problem was after him, there was another corrupt monarch. He came back, got taken out, and then finally the French had this republic type of system, right, of voting. And yeah,
groups. Henceforth, it would be individual rights that would receive priority, not so much the corporate or group rights of the past. For quite some time, those who resisted the emerging emphasis on individual rights and yearned for a revival of the traditional corporatist system were predominantly reactionaries. This corporatist framework was viewed as an antiquated and obsolete.
feels more like socialist ideals, except when socialism's all all 100% freedom, because how they were so anti-government. It's like communism, except when communism, for a classless society, and they feel kind of like labor union. I kind of felt like labor unions, the people in the French Revolution.
Notion from the old regime, firmly rooted in reactionary ideology. But not all those who were nostalgic for the old system were reactionaries. Many moderates and thoughtful scholars of society, such as French political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville and German philosopher Friedrich Hegel, worried that casting off corporatist organization and the bands that tie society together would result in national disintegration. In fact, this is what happened in many European countries from the time of the French Revolution until politics started slowly stabilizing around the 1850s. Until the mid-19th century, the defenders of corporatism were largely in the reactionary camp, but beginning in the 1850s, a more realistic and even progressive form and ideology of corporatism began to come to fruition. It just needed a benefactor to quote-unquote catapult it into modernity and study, and that benefactor would come in the form of the papacy. You see, the Catholic Church sought to find a formula that gave social and economic justice to the rising working class, which was rapidly growing due to industrialization. But the Church also wanted to avoid class conflict, revolution, or societal breakdown, which was being propagated by another working class movement, Marxist socialism, and corporatism provided a formula for doing that. For this reason, Pope Leo XIII charged a commission of theologians and social thinkers to study this new ideology and movement in relation to Catholic social teachings. They would meet at the German University of Freiburg in 1884, and that is when they would come up with the first official definition of corporatism. Quote, a system of social organization that has at its base the grouping of men according to the community of their natural interests and social functions. And as true and proper organs of the state, they direct and coordinate labor and capital in matters of common interest. Note in this definition that corporatism is now a system of social organization, that it emphasizes community and groups of people according to their natural interests and societal functions, that the corporate bodies that oversee these processes are agencies of the state, and that their role is to coordinate labor and capital in the common interest. Corporatism was no longer considered a remnant of an old oppressive system, but emerging as a full-fledged political program and ideology in the modern era. The papal encyclical Rerum Novarum, also sometimes called the Working Man's Encyclical, gave dignity to labor and gave the blessings of the Church for the first time to organized trade unions. It also indicated that organized labor now had to be recognized as a legitimate social movement and incorporated into the political process. But it was with corporatism, not liberalism or socialism, that the papacy intended to achieve these goals. By today's standards, corporatism was not a very radical movement, but in the context of the 19th century, it was fairly progressive. Corporatism advocated for workers to be incorporated into the political process rather than suppressed. It also changed the old paternalistic attitudes towards workers and unions, that it was okay to have them, but that they should be under the control and run by the quote-unquote better people. Now, it advocated for workers to organize their own trade unions, independent of owners and managers. Corporatism had clearly come a long way since the early 19th century. The interwar period between the end of World War I and the beginning of World War II would be the highest point of corporatism in Europe. World War I had revealed the fragility of parliamentary institutions and regimes, and the Great Depression made people lose more faith in their liberal governments. And the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, with its anti-capitalist and anti-religious action, severely frightened people throughout Europe and made corporatism look like a viable alternative. Several states in Europe started adopting and experimenting with their own forms of corporatism. But along with this, we see a sort of schism happening in the corporatist idea, and in the end, two kinds of corporatisms would dominate the interwar period: classical corporatism and fascist corporatism. Governments like Salazar's Portugal, Engelbert Dollfuss's Austria, Antanas Smetona's Lithuania, and so forth, they all adopted the classical corporate system that was rooted in Catholic social teachings and advocated by the papacy.
It makes sense. Think about it. They're all majority Catholic. Poland, I believe, was majority Catholic. Portugal definitely was Catholic. And, which one? Austria? Yeah, this is Austria. Whatever. So, Poland, Austria, I think, and Portugal, they were all majority Catholic countries. Austria is definitely 100% Catholic.
And they tried their best to maintain the corporate system laid out in the late 19th century. Fascist corporatism, on the other hand, as seen in Benito Mussolini's Italy, was unique in the fact that Italian...
Yeah, and also, a lot of people think, or maybe not a lot of people, but I feel like you could make an argument with Hitler being corporatist, but at the same time, it doesn't really make sense since he was socialist, right? And he didn't really work with the companies. He kind of owned all the corporations. He kind of didn't care about the church and kind of just threw it out the window. Didn't really care about that, and he was basically full on dictatorship, right? I don't know about Benito Mussolini. I guess you can consider him corporatist. I think that could make sense, but at the same time, he did have a lot more of a harsher tendency. I guess fascism inherently has some level of corporatism, right? That couldn't, maybe not inherently, but I think it definitely has a lot of those tendency to grab some corporatist ideas, except it tries to go way more extreme in it. So I would say it's more of an extremist corporatist ideal. I think like the classical corporatist idea, something like what those countries like Portugal, Austria had, and kind of also like the German Empire. The German Empire, it had the monarch, but the monarch would try and work with the with everybody, and they would all try and work together in this, right? And the church was kind of close to the government. The corporations were kind of close to the government, and they all kind of worked within each other, and I think that's something good. I kind of like that. I just would prefer people have more say in war, because like if the people had more of a voice in this, I don't think World War I could have started, because people didn't want war, right? That would have destroyed all the businesses. That would have destroyed everything. Like everything would have failed for them. The more people should have had a voice in in this, right? And look at like America. America had much more of a voice for the people than what Europe had, which kind of led to America joining the war way later. And even though they were very, very closely connected towards Europe, right, like with giving a lot of loans towards Britain and giving a lot of loans towards France, they kind of joined the war in 1918, right? Many people didn't want war. I personally think if you want to avoid war, you got to be more isolationist. America isolationism was a good thing until Woodrow Wilson, the idiot, went into war, which most people didn't really care much about war. They didn't want to join in some random war from another continent, yet they were forced into this because the loans were given, and Woodrow Wilson, many people were like, hey, wait a minute, we're going to lose our money. Like Britain and France, they can't collapse. We need the money, right? Because we gave so much money in investments. So they wanted to join in even though people were against it. And that was the bad thing. Isolationism's not a bad idea, right? Just being neutral and just trade and, be left alone while having a voice for your people. But I think corporatism can work with that really well. If the people have a lot of say, and if it's easier to avoid a lot of wars, kind of like imagine today, if we went for a more corporatist idea in America, would that, help our chances with staying away from Ukraine and staying away from Israel and Hamas? Because, like, I think that is what we need the most. Just stay out of wars and focus on America. If corporatism can give a much more better national identity, and if it can help out the country itself better, I don't think it's a bad idea. I think that can work really well, and I think, yeah, corporatism can definitely do that. It's just, I think, it's just hard to really manage. If you can successfully do it well, good accountability for everybody, right, especially on the government side, right, if you can make sure they're accountable for their actions, if you can make sure that, it's not trying to get to the border of authoritarianism, just hitting a good moderate view. I think personally that corporatism is not some kind of crazy outdated system. I think it definitely is something that can be used today and can work. I don't think Western Europe does it correctly. I don't think we should become Europe. I think Europe's a mess. But I think corporatism can work. I just don't think Europe's currently doing it right.
Fascists tried to fuse it with another system called national syndicalism, advocated by the French philosopher Georges Sorel, which is a precursor to the fascist ideology. Along with this, the fascists secularized the corporate system and moved it away from Catholic social teachings, in the end creating a revision of the late 19th century corporatism. While classical corporatism and fascist corporatism both have the same vision of creating a corporatist society, their methods in achieving it are definitely different. While classical corporatist regimes have a strong state, they still offered a more lenient approach in the field of economy. For example, Salazar agreed for the economic sector to mainly stay private with minimal government ownership in exchange for the industries playing along with his regulations, or Engelbert Dollfuss making prominent liberal and free market economist Ludwig von Mises the chairman of the Austrian Chamber of Commerce and an important economic advisor. Fascist corporatism, on the other hand, prefers a much more direct approach in the economy and has a much more totalitarian approach in all aspects of life. Mussolini's Italy undertook a lot more aggressive industrial policies and public works programs. But most importantly, fascist corporatism has a revolutionary zeal, seeking to create a new fascist man and society, while classical corporatism seeks to just maintain social stability and order. While both classical and fascist corporatism share some common features, since they both still aspire to create a corporatist society, they differ significantly in their ideological underpinnings, economic policies, and the extent of their authoritarian aspirations. Classical corporatism is more conservative, less revolutionary, and deeply influenced by Catholic social teachings, compared to the more ideologically radical and secular approach of fascist corporatism. Since fascism was both discredited and defeated in the Second World War, corporatism was discredited along with it, for presumably being a fascistic system. Following the war, most of the corporatist regimes left over from the 1930s were removed or replaced, either through revolution or by wartime occupation armies. For a time, corporatism as an ideology and popular movement with considerable mass appeal all but disappeared. Hence, in the late 1940s and through the 1950s, corporatism seemed to be in permanent, if not yet quite total eclipse. But then, corporatism and corporatist modes of interpretation were slowly being brought back in Western Europe. Although Europe had formally abandoned corporatism, by the 1960s, much of Western Europe had come to practice a disguised version of corporatism, but without calling it that. In a variety of public policy areas like social welfare, incomes policy, economic planning, and industrial planning, a tripartite group of actors, usually organized labor, management, and the state, often got together to negotiate the shape and direction of the policy, and in the modern world, this practice is known as neo-corporatism. As we have previously discussed, these institutional arrangements and functions are at the heart of corporatist theory and practice. It may not have been called that, but corporatism is in fact what it was. It is like the old saying about ducks. If it looks, acts, and quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck. Even a handful of scholars from the 60s began to call these practices as what they were, corporatism. But it definitely was not the same type of corporatism as seen in fascism or other non-fascist regimes. This time it was being adopted by developed democratic countries and integrated into the democratic process and a more liberal market economy. It primarily chooses to focus on labor and business owners, at times bringing in other interest groups when topics like social welfare are put into the question. The discovery, or more accurately, the rediscovery of corporatism in Europe gave rise to a virtual industry of corporatist studies. People in the field of comparative politics were starting to examine it and trace its history, and alongside this, discover other varieties of corporatism in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And today, a lot of countries still practice the modern neo-corporatist model, as previously mentioned the Scandinavian countries, Austria, and even more developed countries in Asia like Singapore. For those who have been paying attention, you would have noticed that corporatism has constantly been evolving, from the old systems of the Greeks and Romans, to the guild and estate system of the medieval period, to the revival and reform by the Catholic Church, the schism with fascism, and finally today with a more democratic neo-corporatist model. Whether we like it or not, corporatism is here to stay, as history has shown. It will always reform and adapt to the current socio-political environment of the country or continent, and it is only a question of time when we will see a stage beyond.
My question is, would it, so like your examples were, Singapore, you know, maybe some Western European countries like maybe Austria and like Scandinavia, but would the Middle East count? That's my question because there are Middle Eastern companies, right? And there's these corporations. There's definitely like a lot of like the church integrated definitely, and let's just say they're not really the best systems. And then also China. China is like capitalist, but they also like control all the corporations, and they also, I think, I don't know, they might have some level of control over labor unions. I don't know much about that part. They probably are the union, but I'm just saying, like, what about China and what about the Middle East, right? And like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, maybe even Iran, right? Like they definitely maybe they're kind of more the extremist type of corporatist ideals, but they're definitely not like good ones. I think corporatism, and they're it's like flipping a coin sometimes. I think that's not really random. It's just something you have to be careful about. It's a slippery type of slope that you need to be really careful about the direction you go for, because you can either end up like maybe Austria, right? I think Austria has a lot of flaws, but I don't think corporatism's the main reason if it that it has all those flaws, right? So you can become something like an Austria, or you can become like China, where China's very oppressive. It's a horrible system, and I would never want to live in China. China's definitely hits that corporatist tendencies, but it does act more like a Mussolini's type of government. I wouldn't be surprised if China directly got, inspired by Mussolini. So I'm just saying, corporatism can work, but can also fail miserably. You just need to be careful about it. As long as it doesn't break down the individual's rights, and I think personally also, maybe sometimes I think it's okay for companies or churches or groups of people to just stay away from the government. Sometimes we just don't want to be in politics. Sometimes we just don't want to be in this stuff. I think that like some kind of group to represent those, right? To represent their voices while also not trying to, right, like get everyone so heavily involved. Because what if I own a business, and I just don't want to do anything, right? I just want to be alone. I don't want to like work with the government. I just want to do my own thing. And I have like one business, like this is my business right here, right? Something like that. But let's just say the government wants me to be connected to it. This is like what a lot of labor unions did, especially in the 60s, where if someone like a worker didn't really want to be with the labor union, do you know what the labor union would do? They would make your life miserable. They would not help you in any way. They would probably try and make it worse. They would just bully you into submission. I don't want the government to bully me into trying to work with them if I don't want to do it. I think it's got to be optional. I think the companies that want to make a good voice, right, or do something good in representing, that should be like the that they like should do it in an optional way. So if they want to, then let them do it, right? They want to work with the government, perfect, right? Perfectly fine. If they don't want to, perfectly fine. I think having that ability to the voice, right? That one example is like, I guess for me personally, I don't like voting too much. I mean, like, most of my choice is based off just voting neutral. I don't really want to, like, if, I'm a kid, so I can't vote yet, but I mean, like, if I'm an adult, unless, like, I really, really want to vote, I'm probably not gonna vote for anyone. I'm gonna be like, my vote is nobody, right? That's my voting decision. You could say that I'm, I'm against voting or something. Like I know a lot of people have been really crazy about it. Like, oh, you're betraying America ideals. Like, no, it's just that's my own personal decision and stuff. I think let people make their decisions. Don't be so, you know. I don't know if we should all be so political and incorporated with government. And yeah, I think that's the end. I think that was a pretty good video.
The
Let's hear it.
neo-corporatism It could be either more authoritarian or more liberal, only
See? Hey, you just wrapped up everything I said. Like, you just wrapped up everything I said. You just said it in like one sentence.
time will tell.
Only time will tell. Okay, I think that's good.
It's going to be a lot.
No. I've had a lot of stupid ads. Lavader, can you stop placing so many ads? It's kind of annoying. But back to the point. Yeah, I enjoyed this video. I thought this was actually pretty good. I think me personally, I think you need to be careful. I think something like you can make a decent German Empire type of system, right? Or you can end up like China. Just saying, you gotta be careful on the direction you go. I think the church, religion. I think religion can be very important in connecting people. I think when you make it really secular, that doesn't help. I think Austria, since it's so heavily Catholic, I think what Austria does right is that it's religious, right? Meanwhile, all the authoritarian ones just so happen to be way less religious because religion, especially like Christianity inherently does give a little more freedom towards people, right? And like look at China. China's secular, right? The Middle East, I don't know much about the Middle East. That one's a little bit of an odd one out, but I think most of them tend to be like just so authoritarian that you can't 100% say it's really corporatism, but they aren't communists or socialists though. So I guess they're just the only odd one out. Maybe because like the religion that Muslims follow, like Islam, it is inherently a little bit more authoritarian. But hey, if they want to follow it, let them follow it. That's their own personal decision. Yeah, I just got done watching a 2-hour long video, second in Germany. Oh, I think I'm reacting to that stuff. And then my home country of England 100% needs corporatism right now. Hey, if England can need it, then, let them have it. Anyways, I guess that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I will see you soon. Goodbye.